Wow, it's so great to see so many folks join us here in person tonight at Shabbat. We were in Chicago recently on the highway rolling down to the airport. There's a billboard. Judaism, come for your girlfriend, stay for the lack of hell. And if the shoe fits, I don't know if I've ever seen a billboard or an ad for Judaism before, but it kind of fits in my story a little bit, so I thought I'd share with y'all tonight. My name is Sam Slate. My pronouns are he, him, his. Part of my journey into my Judaism, my Jewishness, was through CBI, through this congregation and through your Living a Jewish Life class, studying with Rabbi Fulberg and Rabbi Levy. And I am really honored and very grateful to be given the opportunity to share with you some tonight, a little bit of my story, who I am, why I'm here, why Pride Shabbat, and particularly how my queerness and my trans identity and my Jewish identity are so interdependent on one another. They're really three strands of a braid, and a lot of that braid is, braids are strong, right? They're stronger than any one filament of the part. So Pride Shabbat, why do we celebrate Pride? Pride began as a protest. The first Pride was a riot in New York City at the Stonewall Inn. It involved bricks and bats and tear gas and tears. And the next year, people got the idea that they would celebrate that rebellion. That night was about standing up for community. That night was about fighting back for one another. There's a quote that evening of, if you're not sure of the history there were laws against cross-dressing. And literally, the police would show up at bars where our community would gather to be with one another, and you had to pass a test of having so many articles of clothing on that matched your assigned sex at birth. And there was a butch lesbian there, and the police came in, they were harassing her, and she got very upset and vocal and really called out to the community, like, why are you standing there watching them? Why are you letting them do this to me? Sylvia Rivera was there, Marsha P. Jones was there. There's a lot of stories about who threw the first brick. It doesn't matter. What mattered is the community said, we're not going to take this anymore. This isn't right. And we've been celebrating Pride ever since. And Pride now feels more like a celebration, right? It's a joyful experience. It's where people come together to share in common community. Pride reminds me a lot of Shabbat, right? It reminds me a lot of Friday nights when we come together to share what binds us, to share those threads of common humanity that we all enjoy, whether it be our Jewish identity, whether it be through our families and friends, whether it be the community where we live or worship or raise our families. And it's particularly, meaningful to me that as a congregation we're celebrating Pride together. Those of you who identify as queer, those of you who have gender expansive identities, those of you who identify as allies and advocates, and those of you that are just part of CBI and are showing up here to learn more and to have more a part of the Pride experience. So that's why I'm here, and that's why we're here tonight. I want to talk a little bit about why I'm Jewish, how that happened, and a little bit about why it matters to me and hopefully to some of you and to many of you. I wouldn't be Jewish if it were not for my queerness, and I wouldn't be Jewish if it were not for my trans identity. I came out as queer at a very young age, and part of that was meeting a lot of fear and a lot of talk about hell. I grew up in a really small town in Virginia. I was raised Methodist, and the church was really this place of community where my family were. We were there Wednesday nights, we were there Sundays, we were there Sunday nights. That's where my parents' friends were. That's how we spent our time. And there was a lot of talk about hell there. And there was a lot of talk about what you had to do and what you had to believe and how you're going to conform. And man, those gay folk, like they were all going straight to hell. And it was scary for me. And I spent a lot of time in the closet and very afraid of not being able to balance between what I was being told at church and the God that I thought was presented in the scriptures, right? Fast forward, I come into my trans identity in my early 40s, and at that point, I had left the church. There was just not a way for me to rectify the dissonance between how I identified as being a moral and ethical human being in this world and the messages of hate and exclusion that I was subjected to or that I saw subjected in faith communities. So I became involved with the Human Rights Campaign. And the Human Rights Campaign is the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization. Because of my queerness, I sought out community there. Fast forward, I come out as trans, and HRC became the soft place for me to land. It's where I found other trans folk. It's where I found support. It's where I found resources and education. And it became a way to plug into advocacy. The Human Rights Campaign gave me a voice in the process of how decisions are made at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, and how to try to become involved in making change that I felt needed to be changed, made for positive effect, right? For equality for every person, not just the people inside the power structure. And you might wonder, what does this have to do with being Jewish, Sam? Well, as it turns out, I met a girl, a really nice, lovely, beautiful, smart, successful Jewish girl. And as part of getting to know one another, I asked her about her Jewish identity. It's the summer of 2021, and we're sitting in a little restaurant in the Lafayette Square neighborhood of St. Louis. It's just the two of us at a table, and it feels a little iffy, right? Because we are just now getting back into restaurants, right? Like there was still spacing in between them. Nobody, we were all, I think, freshly vaccinated at that point. I had gotten my vaccines in April. I remember the dates of the vaccines, right? And I asked, will you share with me, what your Jewish identity means to you, what being Jewish is like for you? And I've had a lot of conversations and been exposed to a lot of faith-based conversations, and this was unlike any conversation that I'd had before. And the way that Elizabeth talked about being Jewish made me curious. And I was very quickly becoming serious about Elizabeth, and that made me very quickly know that I needed to become serious about learning more about something that was so important to her. So I come back to Austin, I ring up my friend Susan Ann Sorge and say, I need to learn more about being Jewish. Is there a 101 class? Also, I'm queer and trans, so can there be someplace safe for me to go? And that's where y'all come in. And I landed in the Living Jewish Life class at CBI. I called it Judaism 101. I got my book list. I ran to half-price books. I started pouring through them, and for every question I asked, every time I answered that, I just had more questions, which, come to find out, it's a very Jewish thing, right? I fit right in right from the very beginning. And I was really interested in understanding what I needed to believe. What do I need to know? What does it mean to be Jewish? What do I have to do? What is the doctrine? What is the dogma? And Rabbi Folberg, in our first one-on-one meeting, said, I'm not in the business of saving souls. And that was a radical concept for me. Radical. We're not talking about salvation here? Goodness. So I asked more questions, and Rabbi Folberg shared with me that a teacher of his in school said, Christians concern themselves with what Christians believe. And Jews really concern themselves with what Jews do. I still think about that a lot. It really made a difference to my understanding and approach to my education, my Jewish education. I don't know that I could articulate really well what being Jewish means to me or the why behind it and all the different layers, but I can share with you how it makes me feel. When I first dialed into my first class, I saw so many people that looked like me. Folks had their, like, we were still just doing this via Zoom, right? And folks had their pronouns up with their names. There were just lots of queer folk, lots of gender expansive folk, lots of people just interested in learning more and finding a place and a space of community. And I thought, wow, I didn't expect this, right? Mazel tov, Sydney. And I thought, well, this is really off to a great start. And it just got better and better and better. And so as we would share, as Elizabeth and I were, sharing with friends about my process, I went very quickly from trying to learn about Judaism in order to understand more of her experience and learning about Judaism to learn more about my experience. And when I decided to convert, we spent a lot of time, nobody asked Sam to convert. Nobody said Sam should convert. I saw Elizabeth do this a lot of times, like, it's not me. And it wasn't. And how it feels is finding a space in a community where instead of trying to find a seat at the table or standing on the outside looking in, I was offered a place at the table. I was offered this expansive table where not only I was asked to come and sit, but where I was asked to pull up a chair for other people too. And that there's like just unlimited space at that table. And we talk about all sorts of things. And there's a place and space for every person and every thought. And if you're not sure, then you just ask more questions. And I was encouraged to learn. I was encouraged to be curious. And I was encouraged to really question, even doubt. Like, talk about radical theory, right? Like, it's not dogma. Like, what is this? So I made my decision. I decided to convert, and CBI became the place that launched me into my Jewishness. And I had the real pleasure of coordinating my mikvah and my bet din between Austin and St. Louis. Short part of the story here, Elizabeth is from and lives in St. Louis, so Sam went from living in Austin to moving to St. Louis. And my mikveh was actually in St. Louis, and Rabbi Bellows was there with me that day. And he summed up this quintessentially for me, this feeling that I don't know I could have put so eloquently into words, which was, you are as Jewish now, he said this to me, you are as Jewish now as you will ever be, and you are as Jewish as Elizabeth has ever been. And the grace of those words, there's no striving. There's no intent toward perfection. There's no measuring stick. How lovely. Do we all give ourselves that grace in our practice, in our faith, in our family, in our work, with our friends? Do we find them and find ourselves just where we are? This week's Torah portion is it's from Deuteronomy. And I thought, gee, really? Rules. So many rules. But the first part, the very first sentence is see, or behold, set before you are two choices. Blessing and curse. And it doesn't say choose one or the other. It doesn't even say you have to choose one or the other. Maybe you choose both. Maybe you choose neither. And as I understand it, Deuteronomy is written by Moses as the Israelites are waiting to move into the land of Canaan. So there's lots of rules about where you worship and where you rejoice and what one eats and what one does not eat and the whens and the hows and then the festival setup and the timing of all this. And as I'm reading through Deuteronomy, you know what keeps coming up? What keeps coming up is the Levite. And I wrote this down because I didn't want to mess it up. Beware lest you forsake the Levite all your days upon your land. And the Levite, for he has no portion or inheritance with you, and the stranger and the orphan and the widow. Who are the Levites in your life? I felt like a Levite a lot of times in my life. Maybe some of you have too. So Deuteronomy is not all bad. The really great thing is the Haftarah this week is not Deuteronomy. It is Isaiah. And there's talk of sapphires and all kinds of stuff in there. So if you need a break from Deuteronomy, like read the Haftarah, it's a good deal. It's a little bit less than. Why does any of this matter? Well, in addition to having Rabbi Folberg teach class, Rabbi Levy also taught class. And Rabbi Levy was not at my bet din, and I was sad about that, but I was sad for me, but I was happy for her because she was in Washington, D.C. Because there was this little thing called the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court. I'm still mad about it. And so in my studies, I had Rabbi Folberg on the one hand, and I had Rabbi Levy on the other, and a lot of you who were part of that class with me, I recognize some of you. And I had this example now of someone who was out fighting the fight, who was an activist. And I identified with that too. So I was really proud. And it just reinforced that I don't have to choose between the parts of me. See, so much of growing up was about wearing a cloak that made me match what somebody else wanted to see or expected to see. And part of my transition was not only accepting myself for who I am fully, but rejecting all those other cloaks that I've been putting on for years. I don't have to wear them anymore. So I'm queer, and I'm trans, and I'm Jewish, and I'm an activist. And those all go together. I'm sure many of you pay attention to what's going on in state legislatures across the country. There's been over 700 bills introduced. I see nodding heads, I'm sure, like you're all paying attention. And not a few of them here in Texas this year. Yeah. And the bills they're bad, they're full of hate, and they're about bodily autonomy and health care and parents and bathrooms and books. Any of this stuff sound familiar? It sounds really familiar to me, and not about things that happened in the U.S. This is where you come in. I try not to ever deliver a message about who I am without some call to action, which I hear may not be the best thing in the world, or not most comfortable for all y'all. I wrote down 2 quotes by Elie Wiesel. What hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. I've been very fortunate to meet many of you in this congregation, and you're not bystanders. And I would encourage you to continue that trajectory in your life to not be a bystander. The second quote is, there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. I've been doing a lot of protesting lately. And sometimes it feels like it's for naught. Because the bills pass, and the attacks continue, and the hate is propagated. But it's not without hope. And it reminds me a little bit of that duality at the beginning of Deuteronomy. See before you a blessing and a curse. Both can be true. We have the ability to hold both. So while bad bills happen, and while hate continues to be spread in lies and fear, we can be part of that hope and light for one another, for those who don't have that hope and light in their own lives. You might not know it. You might be that candle for someone who just doesn't see light anymore or is just having a hard time that day. I'm really proud to have shared a few of my thoughts with you tonight. I really thank you for your time and your attention. You've just been lovely. See something, say something. Be that light for even just one person. Find that Levite in your life. And if you want to understand how to do more or be part of our process, and you don't know where to go, I'm happy to offer you a few ideas and opportunities to raise your voice up. Thank you so much.